All right, so we're on the third heading of chapter 35, which is an age of anxiety, and we're talking about communism in Russia. So last time we were here in Russia, Lenin had just won the Bolshevik Revolution. That revolution is the famous October Revolution or November Revolution, depending on which calendar you're looking at. But things were not smooth sailing for Lenin. The easiest part for him was getting out of World War One, out of his as he promised peace, land, and bread. The peace was the easiest one for him to do, meaning getting out of World War One. But it wasn't the easiest thing for him to keep within his country. Basically, right after the Bolshevik Revolution, we are going to have another 2 to 3 years of bloody civil war, as the Bolsheviks are going to do everything they can to take over their power. They're, of course, going to disband essentially what was the Duma, and basically going to do everything they can to consolidate their power. Now, one of the reasons they have to do that is for communism to work. The government needs to have total control of the politics and of the economics of the country. So what happens is that Lenin, really kind of according to his promise, immediately moves them into something called war communism. It means that they just basically, as quickly as they can, try to turn this kind of feudal, somewhat capitalistic society into a communist government as quickly as possible. And so part of that is collectivization, which means you take away land or like ownership of things from rich individuals and give them as kind of a collective. And what happens is these collectives basically work, and then you basically get the bare minimum of what you need to survive, and then the rest of it goes to wherever it needs to in the country. So these confiscations, as you would imagine, are incredibly unpopular amongst people who actually own things. Those peasant farmers or industrialists are normally called kulaks, people who have a knack for business. And very quickly, Lenin realizes by 1921 that things are not going well. Their production is plummeting. And so what happens is he backtracks. He creates something called the New Economic Policy, meant to partially privatize the economy. And just like Gorbachev's going to have happen to him later on, that we'll learn about, you open the door for capitalism just a little bit, and it blows the door right open. But what will happen is that they will kickstart a bit of their agriculture and industrial production. The real winners are, like I mentioned, the kulaks, who are basically business people, rich peasants, like not super rich, but peasants who have at least like 8 acres or something like that, and have enough to be able to hire people. And so the kulaks enjoy it because they're able to actually make profits from the work that they're doing. Lenin is going to defend this policy as saying it was one step forward so that they could later take 2 steps forward in communism, and then he dies. So Lenin dies originally from a stroke. He has a stroke, hit him in 1922, never the same. And that's going to lead to his death in 24. Now, he did not put a clear succession, no matter what one of these people is about to say, did not have a clear succession. People thought that probably Trotsky was the most in the mold of Lenin, but another couple, Bukharin and Stalin, are going to also be ready, and the one who's going to win is going to be Stalin. So, oh boy, it's been a while. So, Yosef Vissarionovich Dugashvili is what Stalin's original name was, and he switched it to Joseph Stalin, which means man of steel. So he's from the state of Georgia, not the one in Atlanta here in the United States, but a country in Central Asia. And so he's smart, but not super smart. He's not an intellectual like Trotsky or Lenin would be considered. But what happens is he originally started by going to some Orthodox seminary, decided he didn't believe in God, which is part of communism, not believing in God, and moves into kind of a revolutionary lifestyle. And he will finalize his power in 1928. And what he is going to say is he's going to look around and say, look, part of his appeal is to say, look, we are far, far behind. Okay. If you look at the landscape, he's going to claim that Russia is 50 to 100 years behind the rest of Europe, and he wasn't entirely wrong. Now, the issue was that Lenin and other old school Bolsheviks thought, hey, this is the start of the proletariat revolution. As soon as we start leading, people will follow them, and they start leading, and they're really just going on a walk because the rest of the countries in the world do not rise up in these proletariat revolutions. And so Stalin has a big question to ask himself, and the people, the Bolsheviks, have a big question. For communism to work, it has to be a worldwide revolution. You can't have communism. It was thought you can't really have communism in one country, and then people can just take the goods and move out into capitalist countries. And so, where are they going to take the big jump, the big leap forward to force socialism and industrialization to catch up with everyone else? And that's what they decide to do. So, how do you do that? Well, you do it with an iron fist, or sorry, steel fist, and you do massive collectivization of agriculture. The worst part of this is going to be felt in the Ukraine. Basically, one of the main breadbaskets of what we would know as the Soviet Union back then. And things are going to be horrendous. So again, what's going to happen is these kulaks are going to have things taken away from them. They're going to be sent into gulags. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Kind of similar to what happens with Lenin at first off. This is one of the reasons why other countries would be so afraid of communists, is they would see the death and ruthlessness that these communists treated capitalists. And what happens is we have huge collectivization. So farmers basically collectively own a land, but they really don't own it. And the goods that they create aren't under their control. So to feed people in cities and to do that, what Stalin's people are going to do is these farmers are going to work incredibly hard, and they're not going to be able to make profits. They're basically given very little bit to live on. For many, it will be not enough to survive, and the rest of the food will be taken to the cities and other places. This is going to cause huge issues. This will be very unpopular. But Stalin is known as one of the most ruthless leaders of the 20th century. The American expression is, if you want to make an omelet, you got to break a couple eggs. The Russian equivalent is, when you cut down the forest, splinters will fly. So Russia, in many ways, is pretty splintered. So they get done with the first 5-year plan. So when they do the Great Leap Forward, they have their first 5-year plan, which is like, look, we're here, we want to get there. And they do improve their agriculture and industrial output, but at what cost? And it's still not able to keep up with the Europeans. So sensing that things are not going to go well for them, and that people are going to try to get more control of Russia, Stalin is going to continue the great communist tradition of a purge. And so what was supposed to be the Council of Victors will be the Council of Victims, and he will create huge purges. Now, what's a purge? So what a purge is, which often happens in totalitarian governments, is you get rid of anybody who may be against you. You don't really need proof. And in fact, it kind of helps if you don't have proof, because that makes people more scared of you. So what happens in these purges, then and kind of before and after, is that enemies or potential enemies are going to be captured and will have to confess. And they're normally called wreckers or saboteurs, trying to create downfall for the communist system. There's a trial, which is horrendously one-sided, already decided before they get there, and then there's a punishment. Some would argue, if you're lucky, you get shot. Because if you don't, you get sent to work camps, gulags. At least 8 million Soviet citizens will be in gulags by 1939. And so this life in the gulags is horrendous. So you are usually sent to a remote part of Russia, either a very northern part or very eastern part. And it was a concentration camp. And so it was a place where basically enemies of the state were sent. And you had to live and do incredibly hard forced labor. It was so freezing. You wanted to move. You wanted to keep moving so you could stay alive. A lot of sickness, a lot of death happened in these camps. There were potentials of trials and retrials, but again, you were made an example of. And so this is, again, some of the reasons why there's going to be such a negative response to communism, even though on paper it does tend to be something that idealists are drawn to. With that, I'll see you in the next section.